Welcome to Webinar 9 of the IFC in Education webinar series, Learning in the Age of Disruption. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Alejandro Caballero, and I'm an education specialist in IFC's Global Education team. I will be the moderator for today's discussion. The topic of today's event is the convergence of recruitment and training. This is relevant and timely, given the current COVID-19 pandemic that has forced HR and recruitment companies to rethink their business models and look for growth in adjacent spaces such as skilling, as well as to consider potential partnerships with post-secondary education institutions. The consolidation of the HR and recruitment sector to mainstream the use of technology through online recruitment models is not new. In 2012, Japanese provider of integrated HR and information services Recruit acquired Indeed, a comprehensive online search engine for jobs that had disrupted the job site sector with the aggregation model. A few years later, in 2016, Randstad, a Dutch human resources and recruitment specialist, announced that it would acquire an early mover online job hunting portal Monster Worldwide for almost $430 million in cash. In parallel, some corporate transactions started to bring the worlds of recruitment and skilling together. In April 2015, LinkedIn acquired online learning company lynda.com for US $1.5 billion. Lynda allowed users to learn business, technology, software, and creative skills through videos, following a B2C and B2B model where people could access Lynda on their own, while corporations and schools could purchase subscriptions. In January 2017, Swiss staffing company Adecco acquired Bootcamp General Assembly for $412 million to extract synergies around learning and career transitions. And in 2019, SEEK, the Australian jobs platform, which is represented today in this webinar, led Coursera's Series C while making a parallel investment in FutureLearn, another UK-based MOOC. SEEK had made prior investments in venture capital-backed technology recruitment businesses, two of which are represented today in this webinar, Revelo in Brazil and GetLinks in Asia. How can talent solution companies leverage the significant opportunity that the future of work presents, where workers will be expected to constantly upskill and reskill to respond to the new parameters of the gig economy? Or how will convergence between recruitment and skilling accelerate in the coming years? And what type of new diversification, plays, and M&A activity can we expect going forward? This webinar will enable us to better understand this global trend, which will be shaping the development of these sectors going forward. We have four superb panelists today, global experts that need no introduction, for what we believe will be an inspiring discussion. Let me welcome them to the webinar. Josh Nestor, Director and Head of Education in SEEK Australia. Welcome, Josh.
Hi, thanks, Alejandro. Hi, I'm Josh Nestor, MD for Education for SEEK in Australia.
Thanks, Josh. Keenan Kwok, co-founder and CEO of GetLinks in Thailand. Welcome, Keenan.
Hi, CEO and founder of GetLinks covering Asia. Nice to meet everyone.
Lucas Mendes, co-founder and CEO of Revelo in Brazil. Welcome, Lucas.
Thanks, Alejandro. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity of being here. I'm Lucas, co-founder of Revelo, deep talent platform in LATAM.
And finally, and last but not least, Ramiro Luz, Head of Talent Solutions for Spanish-speaking LATAM, based out of in Sao Paulo, working for LinkedIn. Welcome, Ramiro.
Thanks, Alejandro. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Ramiro Luz, as mentioned, and I lead LinkedIn for Spanish-speaking countries in America.
Okay. And without further delay, let's start today's discussion. This will be a panel discussion followed by Q&A with webinar participants. Feel free to post your questions online. Questions will be addressed in as many as possible in the last part of this virtual event. Let me maybe start by asking each panelist to provide a brief introduction about your organization or area of the organization you represent for Josh and Ramiro, and the services that you offer. Over to you, Ramiro.
Yeah, so probably most of the audience knows LinkedIn as the end user platform, as the place where people go to find jobs, to connect, to keep their professional networks alive. Actually, there is quite much more than that. So I work specifically on the other side of this. So how can we leverage this in a number of use cases that we will explore throughout the webinars, but specifically around how we can leverage this data to empower companies to make better hiring and education decisions, and as well as governments and policymakers. So there is a vast world that we developed of potential applications for this ecosystem. That is where I'm actually focused on.
Thanks, Ramiro. Lucas, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Lucas, founder of Revelo. We are a deep talent marketplace in LATAM. We basically make our money from placing and staffing talent, high quality talent in companies in the US and Europe. Everything is 100% online, and to companies, it's faster, better, cheaper. But it's on the supply side that the real innovation lies. We not only source and screen candidates for the companies that use our platform, but we also help those candidates close skill gaps. We use our marketplace data, employability data, to match these candidates with upskilling courses from over 30 partner schools across Latin America, and we provide financing for those courses. What we're trying to do is to close the loop between education and employability. So it's quite a good fit with the theme that we're discussing here. Yeah, so thanks again for the opportunity.
No, thanks to you, Lucas. And over to you, Josh.
Hi, so Seek are known as an online employment business, mainly in Australia. We did expand internationally. We were in about 18 countries from an online employment perspective, including very large countries like China, Brazil, Mexico, and others where we own significant stakes in leading online employment platforms. Now, for about 17 years, we have been focused on pursuing the nexus between employment and education. We like to make a joke on our side that we've been, it became very sort of famous for recruitment and HR focused companies to invest in education after LinkedIn went and acquired the platform that they did in the education space. But we like to say that we sort of have been doing it for about a decade before that. And really we operate both in terms of helping job seekers to find the education to advance their career. That generates insights and data that we then use to help universities to design and build and deliver programs really aimed at helping people go and get jobs. So we help both on the job seeker side as well as universities on the institutional side. Okay, thanks, Josh. And then Keenan, brief introduction on your side as well.
Sure. So GetLinks is a startup we founded about 5-6 years ago in Asia, and today is one of the largest digital white-collar platform in Asia. We're headquartered in Hong Kong for Greater Bay Area, East Asia mainly, as well as Southeast Asia, the ASEAN markets. So we're kind of like a hybrid between the agency models that take success fees and the job model that takes advertising fees. So we're a portfolio company of Seek, Alibaba, and 2 of the governments that have invested in us. So for our journey is really digital transformation over the past 5 years, where it really kind of just happened in Asia, and how we're learning from the West. And so, yeah, there's a lot of sharing that I'd love to dive into later on. But yeah, Asia, if anyone wants to discuss partnerships, give us a ring.
No, thanks, Keenan. And I have a quick question for you to get started into this discussion. I'd love to hear your perspectives on how the world of HR and recruitment has evolved historically. I mean, there were some disruptions along the way, with Monster.com being maybe an early disruptor in the sector. LinkedIn becoming one, the world's largest professional network, Indeed developing the aggregation model, and then obviously new companies that are more startup companies that are leveraging technology in a very big way, using technology and artificial intelligence. Keenan, could you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so I founded this company 5-6 years ago, but of course, HR tech has been around for a good 2 decades, right? So we remember back in the days, it was posting in coffee shops, or when the internet happened, the job board took off. So in the past 2 decades, right? I mean, Seek definitely being the leader in Asia, out in where we are, really educated all the clients and markets in leveraging technology to hire people, right? Before that, it was always the agency model, but that was more for more expensive executives. But when we are trying to drive digital transformation, make impact by bringing tech people together, it's hard to find, right? Tech people, their skills, the way it's being profiled. So the last 10 years, there was, the social network, and LinkedIn was very successful in really driving digital, dynamics profiles, right? Because if the profiles are not updated, no matter how good the AI technology is, it's a little bit hard to do the matching. So we're already keep evolving already to what we're doing now as a marketplace, a little bit more passive for the job seekers, where they're getting push opportunities around the world, whether it's for permanent contracting, freelance, or project-based models. So a lot of technology is happening around that space. But my last point here is really, we're HR tech space, but my family's been in the education business for 3 generations. So after the full loop, it's nice to kind of come back with this discussion, right? And so what we're seeing is whoever has the biggest database or great curation platform can help match people better, faster. But unfortunately, we can't just push a button and upskill people fast enough, right? So that gap opens up for a lot of interesting startups to help people get placed a little bit better, to basically fill in the supply-demand gap. Yeah, so that's something we can discuss more on.
And we'll have time to go deeper into some of the things that you've started to raise, Keenan. But I'd love to get Lucas' perspective on what are some of the current trends in the world of HR and recruitment services. And in particular, I think there's an intriguing question about whether you can put a monetary value to skills, and how you can have this type of visibility over skills value. Lucas, and I know you have some interesting slides on this that you might want to share with the audience.
Sure. Yeah, I see on your question about the trends, I basically see 2 trends happening right now in the world of HR and recruiting. One is the future of work is the present of work. COVID really transformed the industry, and we were used to a city-based recruiting market, and the market is now global. Everyone's on Zoom. Doesn't really matter if you're hiring the person across the street or the other side of the world. So that's a big change. And the other trend is the increasing proximity between the worlds of education and employment, right? And which is the topic here. And to your second question, can you put a $sign to skills? I think the answer is becoming more and more, yes, you can. And that's possible because a lot of the recruiting activities going online, and a lot of the tracking that is enabled by these online platforms allows us to connect the value of skills and the job market, really putting an ROI value to the skills. So I'm going to share my screen here and show a couple of slides that we've with some of the data that we have over here at Revelo. So if you take an online platform like Revelo that conducts all the matching and staffing process online, you can see that there are courses that make candidates more attractive to companies compared to the baseline, and you can tell which courses are these and which courses actually push interview success to the candidate. So that gives you a sense that not all education content is created equal, and you need the data to be able to tell apart the ones that deliver ROI from the ones that do not. And you can even take a step further and look at salaries. So if you have real-time job market data, you can show the effect of one skill on a person's salary on a very individual level. So I'm taking an example here of a real candidate on the Revelo platform who is a software engineer that used to code on the C# programming language. And we're looking here on the blue bars at his average salary for the past 2 years in $1,000 per month. And what we're doing here is simulating what would happen to that average salary if at this point in his career, he took a course in one of the languages that are listed below here. And you can see that it's clear that for this specific candidates, we would recommend the TypeScript course. That's not true for every candidate though. If we change the candidate, say, hey, this is another profile, the recommendation changes. And so you can really put a dollar value to the skills. You can see what happens to employability, to attractiveness of profiles, and to salaries if you use the right data. So I think that the crux of the issue here, Alejandro, is more and more educational institutions and recruiting platforms need to work together to share that data to result in better ROIs for the professionals that are involved in the recruiting process.
Thanks, Lucas. This is very impressive, and obviously, this type of information is extremely useful also for education providers. We have many education providers connected today to this webinar, and it's impressive to see this type of education being made available to them as well. I would like to turn it now to Ramiro to go a little bit deeper into the case of LinkedIn. I mean, could you talk, Ramiro, about how an online professional network centered about social media has evolved into a talent solutions provider? I'd love to hear a little bit about this evolution.
Sure, absolutely. Actually, the fact of being a social platform is what at the end enabled us to build a quite unique talent solutions suite. So if you think about the way people interact with their careers, this has been evolving over the last decade. So we used it to have 34 years ago, that model when the time when someone was looking for a job was very specific. So I leave the technical school, I leave university, I go to look for a job, I work there for 10, 12, 30 years. Eventually I look for a second job, and that was very predictable in some sense. Today's world is very dynamic. So there is not exactly this particular moment. So people may be exploring proactively or even reactively what is going on, like in a continuous process. And this makes this, to the sense, the way that LinkedIn is structured it was structured at the beginning as a social network, essentially, got attention from corporations, and this was organically growing. So corporations start to understand, okay, you may have something that's really interesting, where I can reach a different set of professionals that eventually are not actively looking for a job, but we could start a conversation. And this evolved over the years. We are in a social media business. You need to be very fast, very attentive to reactions from the customers, from your users, from the market. And we did this. We understood what kind of values companies were identifying that we could offer, and we developed a corporate product suite that is actually right now the main monetization source for LinkedIn. And in the same sense, this may sound very cliche, but LinkedIn has a very clear set of mission, vision, and values. And having this clear, although again, this may sound cliche, but this allowed us to understand exactly what drives value to our users. So one of our cultural tenets that I like the most is the one that we call members first. So every decision that we make, we think, okay, how this interacts or impacts with the user experience, the basic free user that is there building their career. So every decision is subject to, okay, how this impacts our mission of creating value and creating economic opportunity for this particular worker. And we have this like hierarchy of decisions, which makes sense that we can keep a consistent approach. yes, we do. We keep developing, of course, the corporate products, but always keeping in mind that the core of the platform, the core of our existence, is the quality of the experience that this members base have. So over time, this has allowed us to make both worlds healthy and in a fruitful engagement where we deliver value to companies, and as we deliver value to companies, they also find talent and they create an economic opportunity for the workforces in the countries, and there's a very positive interaction between all the pieces of this business, and that happen to connect very well with the context that we are discussing right now.
No, thanks, Ramiro. And it's fascinating to hear about LinkedIn's evolving business model. Let's now switch over to the journey of Seek and hear from Josh how Seek was able to evolve from being a job board company to growing in new spaces such as work with universities. Josh, I mean, how did this happen?
Yeah, it was a happy accident in the beginning. Way back in 2004, we noticed that education providers were trying to infiltrate our audience through job ads and the like. I think they figured out before we did that when people are really actively looking for jobs, that's right at the moment when they're highly amenable to education, because they're thinking about their careers broadly, and they're very aware of the gaps that they might be facing from where they are today to where they want to be. And so what we did was we actually acquired one of the education providers that was infiltrating our audience. At the time, they had 8 employees, and we built that into Seek Learning, which was really a service we provided to our job seekers to help connect them to the careers that they want. From there, we generated a lot of insights into demand around education. We could marry that with our labour market insights, and we could then essentially predict, almost in rank order, which courses would be most popular for our audience. And we took that to education institutions. They took that advice, they built the programs, and the enrollments flowed. And in some cases, we were delivering the enrollments. And so it became quite a self-fulfilling kind of thing. We realized early on that, you can talk about job seekers, you can talk about learners, but at the end of the day, they're people, and they have an aspiration around their career. And by really removing that silo, we could think about the person, the people, much more holistically than one side would on its own. And similar to what Ramiro is saying, we really take a consumer first approach to everything that we do. And so bringing that approach into education, we found there was a really natural marriage between the way we think about our audience and what we're good at, and then what universities are good at and how they think about it. And what we shared, again, similar to Ramiro, is a mission and a purpose around helping people live more productive and fulfilling working lives. So we kind of pulled what we were good at together with what education institutions were good at, and we came up with a better model. And that was essentially a reimagined way of delivering online degrees with employability at the core. And that has been really the essence of what we created in Australia with online education services, which is essentially a higher ed services business, but deeper than their counterparts in other geographies, because we build the courses, we deliver the courses, we teach, and we support the students all the way through their education experience right to the end. And we also provide support around employability. We then started to think about all the other bits and pieces that someone needs to get a job, because a degree is only part of it. And so that moved us into the digital skills space, and quite naturally. And then along the way, because we also had, throughout the expansion of our online jobs overseas, we had some international expansion experience that we could help universities with as well. And so we packaged all of that up, and we really took it to our education partners, be it through OES, through Avenue, a joint venture with Southern New Hampshire University in the US, or through FutureLearn or through Coursera. And really, these are all very similar businesses at their core in terms of helping people prepare for their career through education.
No, George, and obviously the international expansion piece is extremely interesting, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the discussion to go deeper into that, because I think there's many lessons learned for other institutions from what SIG was able to achieve. Let's maybe now go deeper into the core of this discussion. I mean, why is the world of HR and recruitment interested in skilling? What are the specific opportunities for HR and recruitment companies? I would love to have Lucas' perspective on this.
Yeah, why is HR and recruiting interested in skilling? I think the answer is really short and simple, is the skills gap. There's a tremendous skills gap in some specific areas, which leads to talent shortage for entire industries. I think Latin America is a prime example. You have a large number of people that are unemployed, and at the same time, you have 99 out of 100 companies saying that they have a hard time finding great people. And so there's no way that we'll solve the supply and demand challenge if we don't induce additional demand. And I think that digital skills is a good example for that. We think that here at Revelo, we think that people are the most underutilized asset class in the whole world, because you have a lot of people that could be doing different jobs, working at different companies for different geographies, and generating a lot more value and unlocking more value for themselves if they had the right guidance to find the skills and to acquire the skills that they need for that type of work. So I think that the opportunity here, Alejandro, is for HR and recruiting to start seeing upskilling as an integral part of their value chain. It is very difficult for a recruiting company to create its own content. It's a different capability, just as it is hard for a university to set up a career center that will have the same demand liquidity as a massive job board or a recruiting marketplace. These are different capabilities. So I think the specific opportunity here is to build the connections between these two sides of this of what in my view is the same market, is a market of human capital.
No, thanks, Lucas. And you've made a very interesting reference to potentially taking over universities, career centers, and so on. I'd love to get Josh's perspective on this. Josh, do you foresee a world where some of the university functions, either career services and placement, or maybe recruitment, admissions, digital marketing, and lead generation, could be outsourced to a specific HR providers, including job boards and other type of HR tech companies? I mean, how do you see the world evolving, and how likely it is that universities will accelerate the number of partnerships with this type of institutions?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's been happening for a long time already, Alejandro. I mean, we've been providing enrollment services for universities, career type services for universities for more than a decade. We're not the only ones. Many have been providing that kind of service. It doesn't mean that universities don't or shouldn't provide that service themselves. I mean, historically, many universities, I think by their own admission, would say, well, we haven't been that good at it, if we're honest, and they sort of do it because they need to, but maybe they're not the best place to be able to provide the great service in that area as they are in, say, the delivery of academic programs where they obviously excel, and in research and in other areas. I think that universities have got a lot better in all those areas: digital marketing, career services, alumni, and the like. At the same time, though, the number of partnerships in that area has been increasing, and also there've been a number of different kinds of partnerships, from standalone sort of services for one part of the value chain, right through to full end-to-end services, encapsulating a number of services in a bundled offering. I see growth in all of those, and in general, growth in the number and scope of private and or commercial partnerships between universities and all number of commercial entities, including HR service companies.
No, thanks, George. And let's turn again to Ramiro to go deeper into the case of LinkedIn. I mean, I'd love to hear, Ramiro, I mean, how has the acquisition of Lynda.com been leveraged for growth in the skilling space? Could you give us some insight into this?
Sure. Yeah. First, the why of the acquisition is very connected to this evolution that we have been just discussing. That Lucas gave a very sharp and direct overview. In our journey, we have been, as we evolved as a social platform, we got to a point where we understood that we could have a quite clear vision of the movements of supply and demand in the market. So we organized all this data in what we call economic graphs. So imagine a platform where you have the visibility of all these movements, or what are companies hiring, what are skills are companies searching for or hiring, what skills are people enabled in and can offer, and how this matches in different industries and places of the world. And we got to a point, okay, we have the diagnostics, but we of course we need to provide as well as an answer, a solution for this. And the solution that we think can be very powerful, and that Lynda plays a very important piece. We incorporated Lynda in our platform, which we call now LinkedIn Learning. That is an evolution of what already existed in Lynda.com. But the main thing is, there is of course a good library, but the main thing is, how do we make sure we keep this library updated in terms of knowing exactly what is needed, what is the data, what does the data says, where in terms of where do we need to focus in terms of education. There is a ton of content out there, and it's hard for many times for professionals and for job seekers to understand, okay, there's all kinds of offers, where should I focus my efforts and my resources that may be limited to make sure that I can get the best potential outcome. This has many use cases, both for corporations, for individual users, and also for governments or policymakers. A very interesting case that we had over these last months, we did analysis to understand what were the 10 most demanded jobs. So the 10 jobs where the relation between supply and demand was more favorable to the workforce in terms of place where there are jobs at the end of the day. And we built the skill paths to these specific jobs, and we provide this for free for our users. And we launched this together jointly with Microsoft last June, and so far we reached 30 million people over the world, 5 million people in Latin America. But I think the main thing is there is a lot of content, but we need to facilitate this to the users at scale in a way that, okay, if you eventually you're lost your job or you need to find a better job, where are the opportunities and how can you quickly get there, and don't get lost on the hundreds of millions of potential opportunities that are out there. So this has been playing a very instrumental role in our evolution, and for the next years as well, we have great plans in terms of continuously evolving this based on data and facilitating this to professionals.
Thanks, Ramiro, for sharing that. I would like to go back to some of the early points that I think Lucas made on the future of work. And I would like to understand in a little bit more detail, how will current trends in the world of work, including the advent of the gig economy with the emergence of freelancing, I mean, how will this accelerate convergence of recruitment and skilling? I know, Keenan, you have very interesting insights on this. What are your views?
Sure. Again, I can only speak mainly from the Asia perspective, but I guess stepping back a little bit, the gig economy, freelancers, work from home, these terminologies didn't quite exist 10 years ago, right? So we're in such a fascinating time now because the different dimension are moving so quickly, right? The first dimension being different geographic area first, right? With different culture, we can skip that part. But with the freelancers, 10 years ago, they didn't exist. So that means we have to break it down into looking at it from a supply perspective, right? Before, traditionally in Asia, like Japan, right, they work the whole life in one job, permanent. And then slowly you have, project-based, and slowly now it's the freelance model. So that's, where did that supply come from, right? It came from because the talents, they want to shift for a different mode of work. Or is it increased or encouraged because of work from home? Or the 130 million people that got displaced during these COVID environments, right? So that model is here to stay. That freelancer model is definitely here to stay. On the demand side, on the company side, they're really pushing through this forced and accelerated digital transformation, even though they didn't want to, right? Especially in Asia, there's a lot of old businesses, but they're now forced to go through digital transformation. So with these push and pull, we're getting this new group of people, and we have this massive supply of talents in Southeast Asia now. Could they really serve global demands as well, right? So I think it's exciting time because HR companies like ours now are moving backwards with the universities to figure out how do we upskill the upcoming students into work. But at the same time, we're working with all those graduated alumni on how do we skill them for the new economy, right? So I think we're at a time where now we're working, we're in part of all these think tanks with the governments, and a lot of ideas, a lot of experiments that needs to be done, but very mindful, we're still a very small startup company. So, we look forward to, potentially doing some of these experiments with larger companies like Seek and LinkedIn, right? Because now it's really a much bigger and broader topic that we're talking about now. Yeah.
No, thanks, Keenan. And Ramiro, would you like to add anything on the new world of work, in particular, what's changing in the supply and demand of jobs, and how will this affect maybe LinkedIn's and maybe the work of other players with different type of clients? I wonder if you can share a few words on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, one thing is that the first thing is this changes every time faster. So it's hard to predict what exactly will be the main demand 5 or 10 years from now. But what we can know for sure is that will change faster and faster. This was a process that was already in place, of course, for years, but many changes that were nice to have, they with the pandemic, they turned into must-haves for many companies, especially out of the tech space. So if you think about tech companies, they were already, of course, at the center of this process. But if you think as, for example, about retail, banking, and other traditional industries, they were forced to put speed in a process that were happening like slowly over the years. They were forced to make massive transformation in a very short amount of time. And they are now a big part of this conversation as well, because they understand that they need to make revolutions in their business models, and they need to change, in some cases dramatically, the kind of skills that they have in their workforces.
No, thanks, Ramiro. Lucas, I'd love to also go back to some of your earlier comments. I think you've alluded to the importance of technology in shaping this new landscape, the role of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the contribution of technology to accelerating convergence of recruitment and skilling. What are your specific views on how technology is shaping these new trends?
I think first I will try to avoid every single buzzword related to artificial intelligence and machine learning here, because I know that that's sometimes overused. But I think there's a non-trivial role for tech in this connection between these two spaces. And it comes from the fact that content is not the bottleneck in skilling. And this is something that's quite controversial to say, because especially in LATAM, when people look at the skills gap and say, hey, Brazil or Mexico, they need more digital workers. You know what? I'm going to invest in a new course, a new boot camp for front-end developers or for data scientists, etc. That's great, but that's not the bottleneck right now. I think the bottleneck is less in creating more content and more in matching the right professionals with that content, inducing the supply of talent, inducing the demand for courses, and trying to connect those people with that go through these courses with a truly prosperous and fruitful career. And that's something that tech can add, tech can help. tech can definitely show a path to career improvement through technology. As Josh said, this is not new. This bottleneck has not been the bottleneck for the past few months, but it has been the bottleneck for the past decades. And trying to and working together with universities, with boot camps, with coding schools, that has been a lot of my use of my time, because I think that that's where tech can really unlock more value.
Excellent. And I keep going back to the implications for universities, because, and I think thanks for making those references, Lucas, because universities are a big part of the audience for this webinar. I'd love to hear Josh's perspective about, what needs to change in the way universities think about employability, and also what are the type of partnerships that they can enter into with HR companies, job portals, recruitment service providers. Josh, would love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think I would say that employability really needs to be treated as a North Star metric for universities. I mean, a lot of universities conduct some form of graduate survey at some point after the students sort of leave, but mostly the students sort of disappear. And I think a lot of universities would actually say quietly that, look, we really don't have a good handle on the employability outcomes for our graduates, or they're not as good as maybe we'd like them to be. It's not true universally, but I think there's a lot of universities that would admit that possibly quietly. The first step, I think, therefore, is to really get serious about measuring employability. That's got to be one absolute key. Another is to really think about employability as, and just as important an outcome as perhaps more traditional things like preparing our graduates to be future leaders. I have heard some universities, not all again, abdicate on their responsibility around employability by almost implying it's someone else's responsibility, but not theirs, because their role is to produce future leaders or critical thinkers and the like. It really is both. I think that has opened the door, frankly, for education, other unaccredited education providers like bootcamp providers and the like, to come in and offer a service that really wouldn't be required if universities were filling that gap themselves. And the sad part is that I do feel that some students end up paying twice for their education, once for a degree, another for a boot camp or something to make them job ready. So I really think there's an opportunity for universities to get much more serious around employability, focus on it much more as I said, as a North Star metric, and work with strategic partners to make that happen. Because as I mentioned earlier, they don't need to do everything themselves, but if they work with strategic partners, they can certainly, I think, deliver better outcomes under that heading.
Oh, thanks so much for that, Josh. One of the very interesting things about this webinar is that we have different world regions represented. And I'd like to maybe turn to today's speakers for a regional perspective at this point. And obviously, we don't have much time to go into a lot of detail because each region could be a conversation in itself, but would like to get some quick sound bites from Lucas and Ramiro on Latin America, from Keenan about Asia, and obviously, Josh, you have a global perspective, having worked in developed markets like Australia and also emerging markets around the world. So would love to hear your comparison a little bit of what's different in the different markets where you work. So over to you, Lucas, and then we'll let Ramiro, Keenan, and Josh intervene.
Yeah, I think that the two trends that are governing the dynamics in Latin America right now are the ones that I mentioned earlier. One, the market's gone global. So especially for higher end jobs, a lot of talent is choosing to work remotely for companies in the US and in Europe. Latin America is very close to the main cities of the US and Europe in terms of time zones. So that adds a natural advantage for the region to be an extension of the talent pool for those richer markets. So that's something that's that's really shifting the tectonic plates in the talent market in this especially in this higher end piece of the market. And I think the second one is it's become clear that there's a massive mismatch in terms of skills in the market, especially in Brazil and in other countries in South America. Unemployment's on the rise, and at the same time, there's never been such a high demand for talent, specifically in digital skills. So I think that that's where a lot of investment is going for in terms of skilling. And as I mentioned before, a lot of that investment is going into content generation. So more boot camps or universities creating more content towards those that is linked to those areas. That's important. That's part of the solution. That's not the entire solution. That's I think that's where, in a nutshell, how I see the market in LATAM right now. But as you mentioned, we can go on for hours on the topic.
Thanks, Ramiro.
Yeah, 100% agree with Lucas. Very clear perspective. I would just add that, well, the main thing is the demand is changing faster than supply changes, and this makes an imperative to companies to understand. Okay, I will not be able to find the talent, all the talent that I need in the speed that I need. So definitely these towards our conversion. One other driver, particularly in Latin America, we have been very interesting conversations, is there is the high-end point that is totally connected with these perspectives that Lucas mentioned, but there is also a very important concern about the social issues that we may have in a region like ours, given that there is a very large part of the workforce that eventually has a large gap to cover in terms of the jobs that they performed previously and the jobs that are actually being offered. So there is also a very large space to be explored by players like us, by the universities and by the schools. This is a concern for many countries in Latin America right now.
Thanks, thanks, Ramiro. Keenan.
Yeah, so everything that Lucas Ramiro said, resonates in Asia as well. That's pretty much the same. But in Asia, of course, East Asia is developed, Southeast Asia is developing, right? And each market is just very, very different. Asia has historically been, even still now, importing the best from the West. We still do that, right? But we have to do a lot of localization in our market because of the taste, because of, the language and so forth. But I think the key thing that I think about is, if US have a $60 billion HR tech market, right? Japan alone is 90 billion, right? China is growing at 20 billion. Southeast Asia is only at 1 billion right now. So even that HR, it takes time to catch up to developing markets like US and Japan. But that is being extremely complicated now by COVID reset, right? The incoming of AI and automation, right? So all of these things is leapfrogging in Asia now, right? So it's like complexity on top of complexities, solving legacy, upskilling legacy older alumni that are displaced, or working with university partners, which a lot of them have come out to Asia for joint partnership programs now, working with them on new graduates to get them ready for the market, right? Or embracing the new technologies and working with the universities to give them a lot of internship through the network of all these startups opportunities we have, and let the students fail and iterate faster, right? So there's just too many moving pieces right now. And I think that's also what makes Asia exciting, as well as what Asia relative to the rest of the world can do together. That's what makes it interesting.
No, thanks, Keenan. And finally, Josh, what's your views on regional disparities?
Yeah, look, I'll just add one thing, which is often I think universities think about what's happening in a more developed market and what can be taken to a more emerging market context. And there's a lot of knowledge transfer that tends to go in that direction. One thing I think that universities in more advanced economies can learn from, say, those in emerging markets is the much more rigorous focus on employability. I mean, really in markets like India, the main game is about employability. And there are some fantastic models in that market where universities really live or die by their ability to deliver job outcomes, hard, tangible job outcomes for their graduates. I know in Brazil, Lucas at Revelo is doing incredible work with a whole bunch of education institutions to make sure they're preparing digital skill workers for the global talent economy. So what I'd say is, if universities in more advanced markets are looking for inspiration and ways to improve employability, look to the emerging markets for where there is a lot of innovation happening out of necessity.
No, thanks, Josh. And that's a very interesting reflection, and it really talks to the audience that we have in this webinar with a big representation from emerging markets. I would like to now turn it to the Q&A part of the discussion. We've received many excellent questions from our audience. Let me maybe start with some of these questions. I will ask panelists today to be crisp and succinct in the answer, so we can cover as much ground as possible with their responses. Let me maybe start with one question for Keenan. What are the new dynamics of remote work, and how are they changing the rules of the game of job seeking? Could you talk to that, Keenan?
Yeah, so Asia, Southeast Asia, traditionally massive supply pool of great talents. Are we only competing off cheaper and faster? That will always be there. But with the forced acceleration of, work from home digital transformation, how do we allow some of these talents to bridge into the work opportunities in the West? So remote have a lot of technology that is allowing first-time triers of clients in the West to try some of these remote workers from our markets. And we're seeing very, very favorable outcomes so far.
No, thanks so much, Keenan. There's a second question that has come through on COVID-19 impact. And the question is whether COVID-19 has disrupted digital models or simply accelerated pre-existing trends. I wonder if, Josh, you would like to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 in.
Yes, absolutely. Look, it's accelerated things that were already happening. I mean, we've been investing in these trends for almost 2 decades, and there's really no surprises here, other than COVID has just accelerated a whole bunch of the underlying trends. And we, as a case in point, we surveyed a whole bunch of prospective students across 6 or 7 markets across Asia. And really asking about their attitudes towards online. And we know that in Asia, there's been cultural resistance to the adoption of online, much more so than in Australia or the US, or even indeed Latin America. And what we've seen is that people are significantly now more open to online than they were pre-COVID. And we don't see that trend reversing, because as I said, it's really just been an acceleration of what was happening already. What I do think will happen is I see an online-led blended future. So blended learning, everyone's talking about it. It's clearly the way forward, and it delivers the best of both worlds. But the take on it that I see is an online-led blended future, where what can be delivered online is delivered online, and is then augmented with physical elements where required.
No, thanks, Josh. There's another very interesting question for Lucas that has come through. And the question is about some of the leading technology companies worldwide, the Googles, Amazons, obviously Microsoft, and so on. Will they ever play in this space? Do you see a world where they can be either competitors, partners, or collaborators to some of the companies that are thriving in the HR skilling space? Would you like to share some perspectives on that, Lucas?
Yeah, look, they already do that. I think that there's a company in the US called Udacity that provides content, and it's a fairly well-known company founded by Sebastian Thrun. Their initial value proposition was that education led by industry. They wanted to produce content that was informed by the hiring needs of the Googles and Facebooks of the world. So that's great, and I think that they will become more and more an important partner in the of recruiting and skilling companies in the world. I don't think they would be a competitor. I think there's a salary dynamics there to be considered, Alejandro. These are companies that are paying salaries for the workers that they need that are considerably above market rates. They're making life harder for the SMBs of the United States and Europe by basically getting whoever they want for whatever price it takes to get them. So I think that, and I don't want to badmouth them here. I think that if I were them, I would do the same. But I think my concern here is more about how the rest of the market reacts. And when Keenan talks about yes, the rich countries of Asia have to look to the developing countries of Asia as a source of talent, just as the US has to look at Latin America. That wave will come from the SMBs first. It will come from smaller companies. It will come from startups that are being pressured by the Googles of the world for talent, in a competition for talent. You might not compete with Google with your product, but if you're in the US, you are competing with them for talent. And that's a new reality that the COVID crisis has brought upon us.
No, thanks, thanks, Lucas. We have a very final question for Ramiro here, and would love to get your perspectives on this, Ramiro. The question is, how can technology close the disparity for groups like women and youth? And I would also want to blend this with another question that came around the impact of these models in sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm sure LinkedIn has a lot of presence in the Africa region. I wonder if you could respond to this. I mean, the impact on groups like women and youth and the impact on regions like sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, sure. That's a fantastic question. And actually, when we think about, okay, that is how this technology potential that we all on this kind of companies have access to. One of the main things that we have been putting a lot of efforts in is, okay, what do we want to do with this potential? Because we can do what we are already doing and that we know how, but that is certainly what is the main challenges in terms of employability and what is the challenge and concerns of the workforce, the actual average worker. And a good part of these concerns and are related to exactly to the subjects of this question. A social network and a professional network, to a major extent, it represents the society. So it evolves as the society evolves, and it needs to be attentive to what are the concerns and needs of the society. And right now, if you think about what is the workforce demanding, besides, of course, the things that we already discussed, there is a strong desire and a strong need that voices are equally heard and equally represented, and and this came from different players. This is a desire from the workforce, from the society. This is a desire from companies, because of course they understand that this is a must-have condition to evolve. And of course we are taking a closer look to this as well. So we have been taking a lot of actions in this sense, in terms of, first, it's important to understand and to have data to make decisions. So for example, the gender gap is something that is still quite obvious, but it plays differently across different industries and different subject areas. So we have very interesting discussions with companies in terms of how they can actually diagnostic what is their current representation, what is the average representation in the market, so they can set realistic expectations to the short term, and we leave the ideological side and we go to practical actions that we can measure and that we can implement. And we also work on our tools to make sure that these representations are reflected on search results and in visibility for recruiters, for example. There is one concept that Jeff Winner, our former CEO, launched last year that really resonates with me, and I think it's one of the main things for us to think for the near future. He discussed he created a concept that we call the network gap. So we have the skills gap that is super clear and have discussing over this hour, but there is also a network gap. So if you take in the US, for the example that they used was from the US, but I'm sure this is real every other place and even more critical in emerging markets. The zip code, the location that you are born, where you are born, and the school that you attend, that this drives like a massive piece of the outcome that you can get professionally and economically. So the thing that we're thinking internally and we are developing right now is how can we make sure that companies and opportunities are skills first, so that companies are enabled to find the person that have that skill, no matter if they are closer in their network or if they are across the world, but that companies are able to hire based on skills. Of course, there is the other piece of developing these skills, but once we develop, we still hire a lot based on networks, based on, okay, who is closer to us, what are referrals, who we know that attended the same university that someone in my team has attended. So we are working hard to make sure that companies hire based on skills and not in location, gender, or whatever other characteristics may be considered here. In terms of sub-Saharan Africa, I'm not really an expert on this market, but I assume that some things that happens in parts of Latin America, to some extent, may apply there as well, where we have a large younger population, where skills will be a critical piece of this. So how can we understand what we already have and we develop these skills and we make sure that this workforce is projected to the globe and use all this that we discussed here, that they are also part of this projection to the globe. And again, the things like remote work and the barriers that were removed with the pandemic can plays a very interesting role here. So we have, for example, a customer that is based on Bolivia, and they are growing extremely fast. And I'm taking a Latin America example, but for a country that I know that somewhat may resonate. And they're growing extremely fast, exactly by forming good tech talent and outsourcing this labor to elsewhere in the world. So I'm sure these examples will arise in Africa as well.
No, thanks so much, Ramiro. With this final question, we have come to the end of our discussion today. I wanted to thank our panelists once more for a very vibrant and engaging discussion. Thanks so much. A virtual round of applause for you. It has been a great pleasure to have all four of you with us today in this virtual event. We will reconnect on May 20th with another thought-provoking IFC in Education webinar. In the meanwhile, please stay safe, and the IFC Education team wishes all of you a very happy end of the week. Thank you all.